Welcome to Conscious Conversations. My name's Luke McLean. What's Conscious Conversations? It's a little podcast I created a couple of years ago, which was really based on catching up with people who I felt were living from a place of authenticity and purpose, and wanted to tell their stories about how they found their journey, some of their teachings, learnings, and insights from living on an authentic path, and really delving into the areas of well-being, mindfulness, meditation, leadership, culture, a whole variety of areas that I wanted to discuss and explore. So that's really been the heart of what Conscious Conversations is. If you go back through the episodes, you'll see a lot of different people around plant-based, around elite sports, endurance sports, culture, meditation, all different things. So, go through the archives and check out. You might find a few episodes that interest you. If by any chance you do like the podcast, I'd love for you to give it a little bit of a rating on iTunes. That always helps get me up the list a little bit further and allows me to get to a few more people, which is really important for me, because that's my mission, is to get to as many people as I can. It's an extension of what I do naturally as a person. I'm a father of 5. I'm a life coach. I'm a certified meditation teacher. I've worked for 10 years in corporate well-being, working with a $1 billion company around building their well-being program, and that then sort of verged into working with, departments like hundreds of millions of dollar departments and teams around their culture and around their well-being and their mindfulness, and coaching some of the leaders in that space. So really been energized to do that work and to grow myself so I can grow other people. So that's just been and the podcast, I guess, is an extension of that, and catching up with a lot of people that I've interacted on that journey and been able to tell their story on this podcast. So you'll find plenty of those, in the library as well. And I guess today, we go right back into the wellness space, and I love this space to sit in sometimes. And, Dr. Brett Hill is one of the pioneers, I guess, of holistic wellbeing in Australia, in terms of, getting the word out there in podcast. He hosts what's called a wellness summit, which really gets, people together to talk about, cutting edge wellness information, findings, teachings. He was co-founder of what's called the Wellness Couch, which holds space for a lot of wellness experts to hold podcasts. So he's been really a voice for wellbeing in Australia for a long time, and he's got so many great insights. This conversation just, nuggets of gold just roll off his tongue, and he speaks to it so easily because it's a part of who he is, which I really loved about this conversation. But he's a lot more, than just lip service and one-liners. He talks a lot in this podcast about some of the shifts and challenges that he went through not so long ago, and how he's grown out of that, and how some of the teachings that he'd given other people, he actually had to sit in a lot over this time and learn from them, which was really nice to hear, because there are a lot of people out there, who are wellness experts, but they talk about it in a way that it just seems so easy, and we all know that it's not. And Brett's really good at sort of meeting people where they're at. So much so that Brett sort of moved on to a mentoring program that he's created now, and you can go on to his website, which the link will be in the bio, and he offers 30 free days of mentoring that you can work with him, find out if that group's for you, and if you're going through a challenging time at the moment, maybe that's exactly what you need. So definitely check that out. But I love this podcast. I love to catch up with Brett. It was really good. I was so glad to meet him, and I think you'll get a lot out of this podcast. So definitely give it, a little bit of airspace for those ears of yours. So without further ado, my name's Luke McLean. This is Conscious Conversation, and this episode is with Dr. Brett Hill. I wanted to start because I read in the bio and I thought this was a really, because I resonate with this, so much. But, growing up, as a kid, but growing up sort of as an unhealthy, sometimes sick sort of kid. And I wanted to talk to you about, what that was like, and whether, in your family there was just a lack of awareness around wellness, or was it just that particular time where it wasn't as well known within, the community, and it wasn't talked about as much?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and the thing is, I always find funny about this because I wasn't a like terribly sick kid growing up either, and so I was kind of like I tend to think of it as just like kind of the normal sick. Like I wasn't healthy, I wasn't thriving. I was always getting like coughs and colds, and I was asthmatic and all of these sort of things. But I wasn't like it's not like I was in hospital. It's not like I was really struggling with my health. So lots of other people will have had far less healthy upbringings than me as well.
Mm.
But I think it's a good reflection on kind of where we're at as a society, where we sort of have this idea that well, as long as you're not really sick, then you're healthy. And we sort of struggle to differentiate between not sick and healthy, and I think that's where the sort of crux of it was for me. And I think a lot of that, like you said, was just kind of around societal knowledge around health. Like I don't think my parents were particularly unhealthy. A lot of our meals were cooked at home. I grew up in a pretty good environment, but at the same time, there was a lot of food there that I now wouldn't choose to eat, that I know isn't necessarily good for me, whether that's sort of, lots of gluten or dairy or sugar or, processed foods, all those sort of things that, processed breakfast cereals, all that sort of stuff that I don't necessarily eat now. That was just very normal, and to a large degree, I think still is very normal in Australian society. It's that standard Australian diet that often gets talked about that is in many ways contributing to lots of not only disease, but what I often refer to as dis-ease, which I think is largely where I wasn't necessarily diagnosed with a particular disease, but I certainly wasn't healthy either. So, but at the same time, my parents were quite mindful. So, I remember growing up, my brother was, a pretty energetic fellow and sort of bouncing around, and probably if he was born nowadays, he'd end up with some sort of a diagnosis. But my parents were aware enough to realise that sugar and food colorings didn't work well for him, and so that was certainly something that I know that they sort of minimised within the house, and so they did have some level of health awareness, but it certainly wasn't to the degree, and the information wasn't available to the degree that it is now with the internet and just society in general.
Just, even with my kids playing football at the moment, like after football, there's still the free sausage or the free
Yeah,
hot dog normally, or the lollies at half time.
yeah, totally.
And it feels like for me that there's still a huge lack of parental education on what good food is and how to create high quality food for your kids, and a lack of awareness of the actual impact poor nutrition and obesity is going to have on children later on in life, and that almost as parents we're custodians of that.
Yeah, and it's almost like there's a dichotomy now, isn't it? Like where, some parents are sort of heading in one direction and becoming much more aware of that, and the information is there now. Like it's readily available for any parent who wants to go and find it in terms of diet and nutrition. And as much as that can be confusing, in that there are lots of conflicting messages about what is and what isn't healthy food, I think whichever route you go down. There are some real commonalities with whichever approach you take in terms of diet and exercise and health for your kids. So, some parents are kind of heading down that route and really focusing on and being very mindful of what they're doing with their kids in terms of not just diet, but also exercise and mindset and chemicals in their life and all of those other factors that we know are important. And then there's kind of another probably larger group of parents who are sort of heading the other way and sort of saying, well, I'm not sure that I believe in all of this, and maybe it's just a bit of, some weirdos who are doing this strange stuff, and I ate this stuff and I'm okay, and that kind of approach as well. So it does feel like there's a bit of a dichotomy where people are almost getting further and further apart in terms of their health choices.
And do you feel like, Brett, is there a common middle ground in that? And I say that because I see that you're quite heavily involved in the paleo. Us as a family, we're sort of more plant based, but we're vegan. And I don't have any problems with either. I do have the problem with high amounts of sugar and processed foods, and that's sort of when I talk to people, that's sort of the foundational starting point of if you want to eat meat, but eat high quality meat, and sort of you want to know where it comes from.
Yep.
But the foundation is eat a lot of good fruits and vegetables, eat a lot of unprocessed foods, and really try to start with that as your foundation.
Yeah, and I guess that's where I was coming from before. I was saying sort of there is a lot of commonality between all of these approaches. Like, I think for me as someone who eats paleo, I probably eat a lot more like you as someone who eats vegan than I do like someone who I could pick off of the street who's just eating the standard Australian diet and junk food and margarine and bread and all that sort of stuff. So, there's a lot more common in our approach than there is differences.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I definitely think, where the biggest commonalities we have are food quality, as opposed to, rather than just looking at what we're eating, we're looking at the quality of what we're eating. So if we're having vegetables, then ideally we want them to be organic. We want them to be as natural as possible, as chemical free as possible. If we're having meats, then we want that to be from healthy animals who are, grass fed and free range and treated humanely and all of those sort of things that we all agree are really important. So I think whichever of those approaches you're taking, there's a lot of common ground there. And I think there's a lot of common ground that can be found with parents who aren't necessarily taking a healthy approach right now as well. I feel like a lot of the times we try and set up this dichotomy and we have very black and white thinking around these things where it's like, well, either you're in or you're out. It's almost like you either care about your kids or you don't, when the reality is all of these parents care about their kids. And so it's just, what we need to do is find the common ground so that we can have conversations rather than arguments and discussions versus, avoiding each other because we don't happen to think exactly the same thing. So I definitely think there's heaps of common ground that can be found. And by looking for that common ground, I think is where we're going to find the most growth in terms of our own health and wellness and also our kids' health and wellness as well.
And as a professional, in the wellness space and obviously working a lot with people, like how do you go about finding that common ground?
Yeah, well, really, it's about finding what people are interested in. It's about talking less about why I do what I do and talking more to people about why they do what they do, and helping them see how, some of these healthy changes might be able to help them get what they want. So, it's a lot more about asking questions and a lot less about dictating beliefs. It's about finding out what matters to them, finding out what's important to them, and helping them, giving them some options. I'm not going to ever say to them, look, you have to do it this way, but I'm going to say, here's some options. Here's some different ways you can do it. It's up to you to find what works for you. I can't do it for you. I can't make you do it. And in fact, even if I tried, that wouldn't work. It's about you figuring out what works for you and what's going to help you achieve your goals. So that's where it really comes down to in terms of the common ground is, I want what's best for them. They want what's best for them. How can I help them see that maybe some of these other strategies might be a useful way to help them get what they ultimately want in life?
And do you find that a lot of those strategies often they're less about, movement, for instance, or it's less about, mobility or functional food, and it's more about life and time management?
Oh, I think they all come into it. I think that we need to address all aspects, that we need to look at movement, we need to look at food, we need to look at mindset, we need to look at time management. And in many ways, it almost doesn't matter which end you approach it from. I know so many people who've changed their life and it started out from a passion for exercise. I know lots of other people who've changed their life and it started out from, delving into a particular type of diet. I know so many people who've changed their life and it started out from them getting into yoga or meditation or, whatever that happened to be. So, I always feel like it's more important that what direction you're going in than how far you're going. It's more important that you're taking that first step and becoming more conscious and aware of your choices and aware of the options that are out there rather than just kind of robotically living the life that you're kind of given and that you're told by sort of society and media and TV ads and all those sort of things is the way you should be doing it. So I think you can access it from any number of angles. And I think what's more important than which one you start with is figuring out which one's going to work best for you. So, if whichever one is going to be the easiest for you to get started with, I'm a firm believer that that's where you should start. What we need to do is help people make really smart goals for themselves so that it can be really achievable and really relevant for them in their life. Because that allows them to start that sort of snowballing process. That allows them to make that first change, which can so often be the stimulus for so many other changes along the way as well. I see this in practice all the time as a chiropractor where people come in and sometimes their first thing they start is just getting chiropractic care. And whilst that can be somewhat of a passive approach, the whole education that comes with that and the mindset that comes with that and the connection between their brain and their body through their neurology is often that first step that allows them to think, well, hey, if that can change my life, then I wonder what else I could do that could actually help make things even better as well. So I think there's any number of ways you can start, but starting is the most important thing.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's really good advice, Brett. And I think understanding that so much of those wellness shifts are deeply connected, like, food to yoga, yoga to meditation, and all of a sudden you start to build out a bit more of a holistic lifestyle naturally, as opposed to trying to do it all at once where you might feel overwhelmed.
Yeah, absolutely. My first book I wrote was called How to Eat an Elephant, and it was all about that. It was like small, sustainable changes. I really like the Kaizen principle that the Japanese talk about. Small steps of continual and never-ending improvement. And I think, for most people, and there are exceptions to this rule, but I think for most people, that's the way they go about building sustainable lifestyle change and changing for a lifetime rather than for a moment. I think often people who make drastic change do it for a short-term goal, and it might be, getting into your dress for your wedding. It might be getting fit for, go to the beach in summer or whatever it is. But that often doesn't translate into longer term results. There are exceptions to that. There are the 5 or 10% of people, I think, who are exceptional in that regard, where they can go and they do like a Whole30, which is like kind of a paleo one, where you just change your whole diet overnight and you go totally strict and away you go. And they do that and they succeed at that and they manage to keep doing that for the rest of their life. And some people just are sort of wired that way. But I think for most people, setting themselves up for success, getting little wins along the way to help build their resilience and to help build their confidence in themselves and to help build their self-worth is really important as far as snowballing that process and creating bigger change.
Yeah, I always say, Brett, when I'm working with someone, when I used to, especially PT a lot, it was like, don't lose 5 kilos in 5 weeks, lose 5 kilos in 5 years. Because if you can do it for 5 years, that's the real shift. It's the 5 weeks is pretty easy for most people. You can do enough in that amount of time. So I think it's absolutely, the starting point, and what you're saying is really important.
Yeah, and the other quote that goes well with that is that kind of one of, people overestimate how much they can do in a day and underestimate how much they can do in a year. So it's like we always want to do it quick, but the reality is often doing it slow is what gets us the biggest change, because consistency is the key. You keep building and you keep building, then you can make massive change over, a 5-year period. Much more so than if you're starting and stopping, because often that starting and stopping, not only do you not move ahead, but often you end up going backwards, because it just ruins your self-esteem and it ruins your motivation, and it makes it harder and harder to make changes the next time.
Yeah, and I was going to get into that just then, Brett. How important are our belief systems? How important is our mindset and our self-esteem? Not just to create changes in wellness, but as part of our holistic well-being right now.
Yeah, look, crucial, especially right now. I think there's a great book by a girl by the name of Carol Dweck, a lady, I shouldn't say a girl, and she's definitely more than a girl. She's a very, very smart lady, and she wrote a book called Mindset, which talks all about the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset, and it's a fascinating book. And the whole idea is around this fixed mindset that people can get stuck in, where they kind of start to think more black and white, and it's about succeeding and failing, and they tend to think that any of their traits that they have as a person, their abilities, their intellect, are all quite fixed, not so changeable, and so then they start to take that on as a personality, and I think in times of crisis, like we're seeing right now around the world, in times of fear, then we tend to move more towards that fixed mindset, and in some ways, I think that's probably healthy. Like I think that's a natural sort of evolutionary response in times of real fear, to move into that fixed mindset, because that's a logical way to deal with a acute crisis, is to have a very clear, very structured approach to get you to safety. I think of it like if you're in the military. When you're in the military, you want people to just clearly follow orders and to know exactly what to do, because that ultimately saves people's lives when they're in those extreme crisis situations, right? But then most of our lives is not lived in an extreme crisis situation. So what we have to do is we have to have the ability to move beyond that initial sort of fixed mindset and move back into a growth mindset, so that we can not just get beaten down by these stresses and challenges that are going on in the world, and not even just survive through them. Because traditionally with our resilience, we've talked a lot about resilience being the ability to survive through stress. But I think now what we're starting to talk about is the ability to thrive through stress, and to actually use it as a educational tool, use it as an opportunity to learn and to grow and to develop and to come out the other side of that as an even better person. So, I really think our mindset of how we approach things, particularly right now when there's so much uncertainty going on around the world, the opportunity is there for us to either shrink as a result of that or grow as a result of that. Or something in between, and just kind of try and survive. And I think our mindset is really what determines which of those camps we're going to move into.
Mm. And what would you say, Brett? Because I think that's really good advice in that, that expansive mindset. And what sort of mindset would you be taking into what are you taking in right now into sort of how the world's going? Like how would you pinpoint that mindset for you?
Well, for me, I think it's about focusing inward more than anything. So I think we can often get so caught up in all of the stuff that's going on around us. And, we're in a bit of a unique time in history where we have more information than we've ever had before, and more information about every corner of the globe than we've ever had before. And I think often what that does is it can put us into that. And because a lot of the information that's shared with us is the negatives, it can really put us into that stress and fear response, and that can push us towards that fixed mindset. So I think it's really important to be aware of what's going on in the world and the world around you. But at the same time, I think it's really important to focus on what you can control. And, primarily what you can control is yourself. As much as we'd love to think that we can control the world around us and our community and even our family, we all know that when we tried it, it doesn't work all that well. And that the one thing we can really sort of focus on and control best is ourselves. So, I think the opportunity is there for us right now to really focus inward, and to look at building up our internal resilience. And to look at building up our internal, focusing on that growth mindset that I mentioned just before, so that we can see these challenges as opportunities and thrive through them. And the irony of that is that if we can do that for ourselves, then we can become a beacon for our family. Our family can become a beacon for our community. Our community can become a beacon for the world, and you can make huge change. But it starts with you, rather than getting so caught up in all of the news that's out there in the world at the moment and the fear that's out there in the world on both sides of the equation. The fear from, I guess, the medical establishment and the politics and all that side of things, but also the fear from, I guess, the alternative side, which is the conspiracy theories and the stories and there's a lot of fear on both sides, which often happens in times of crisis where, 1 + 1 = 5, and all of a sudden these things blow up and become much bigger stresses and dramas than they may perhaps otherwise have. So, I think this is the opportunity we've got is to sort of focus on what we can control, and focus on our own growth and development and how we can use these challenges to help us thrive, not only now, but into the future as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting point of view. Like it's what I'm hearing is there's a lens to go, more introspection and to look inwardly, and that potentially what you're saying is going to provide more of a growth mindset than people might think, that getting a lot of information from external sources will actually provide more of a growth mindset because it's going to make people grow more. But you're actually saying going inward is actually a good tool for that.
Yeah, well, I do, because I think that until you've gone inward, until you've sort of got really grounded and comfortable in yourself and comfortable in your knowledge, and comfortable in your self-love and your resilience and your skills to deal with it, then you're not going to be in a position to take on board that information anyway and to utilize it in a positive way. So, I think it is really important that it starts with you. Once again, as I said, I don't think you should be avoiding the news. I don't think you should be ignorant of what's going on in the world around you. I don't think you should be ignoring big, political issues or health issues that are going on. There's certainly stuff there that that we should be concerned about. We don't want to all ignore it and have the world change without us, and be that person who didn't speak up and allowed it to happen. So I'm certainly not saying we need to ignore that totally, but there really needs to be a balance there, and I think it needs to start from within and then expand out rather than starting from out and coming in.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And again, I think if you chunk down on that question, and when we think about a society it's highly addicted to external forces and the subliminal messaging, and has been brought up on decades and decades of conditioning from the media, how do we get someone to go inward and feel comfortable to go inward, and and not feel that that's a lonely spot, or to feel uncomfortable doing that because they're not practiced in that?
Yeah, well, I think once again, it comes back to just starting small, So there's lots of things you can do. There's a whole process you can sort of go through to work on that. But really, I think it starts with, focusing on self-love and self-care, is understanding that you're worth that, that it's important that you do look after yourself in times like this, in times of crisis and times of stress, as well as in the good times, that you have that care and that love for yourself, and that you realize you're worth it and you're important, and that you're of value to society. And so if you can come from that point, then I think you have the opportunity to start doing things to look after yourself, and to look after your physical health, your chemical health, your emotional health, and build up that innate resilience. Because I think what we're talking about is a resilience and a growth mindset that is innate. It is I think our natural state. But many of us have been pushed so far away from that by society, by our conditioning, by our upbringing, as you mentioned before, that it does take some conscious effort to start to return to that. But I think, once you do start to return to that, and you can take just some small actions to help build up your health and your resilience and your growth, then that can really start that snowballing process. And that then can help you connect with your bigger purpose. So, once you've got that confidence within yourself and that strength within yourself, then you have an opportunity to start expanding out into your higher purpose and helping the world and giving the best of yourself to the world. But it's that sort of thing of trying to, you can't help other people with an empty cup. You've got to fill up your own cup first.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And what would you say, Brett, would be some of those, starting points to cultivate some self-love?
Well, obviously it's different for everybody, because it really depends on where you're starting from, right? But I think, for me, a lot of it comes down to self-love actions. So it's about doing the things, it's about prioritizing myself, making time for myself to do the things that I know help support me to be the best version of myself. So that is, and I think that the vast majority of the benefits we get in this regard are doing the simple things really well. And so we're talking about physical things like just getting some regular exercise, or not even exercise, just some regular movement, whatever that looks like to you. And doing it in a way that you love, doing it because you love yourself, not because you hate yourself, right? So making it fun, making it enjoyable. So, if you like to dance, then go dancing. If you like to play footy, then play footy. Find the thing that you love to do and help incorporate some of that great physical movement into it as well. And in the same way, chemically is finding foods that you love that are good for you. Finding products that you love that are, chemical free, that are good for you. Is supporting yourself in that sort of loving, nurturing way, with what you eat and with what you put on your body and what you put into your house. And in the same way, the emotional side of things is investing time in, spending time connecting with your purpose, spending time being grateful and expressing gratitude, spending me time, just doing whatever it is that makes you feel relaxed. And once again, that might be yoga or meditation, but it might be fishing, or it might be, whatever that is for you that you love to do that makes you feel relaxed. So it is just those real core basics of self-care, I think, is where you need to start from. And then I think as you build up that resilience, then you can start to look at doing things that do challenge you. And so you can take on some more intensive physical activity in a way that challenges you. Like my family and I have just signed up for True Grit. We're going to go do the obstacle course. And that's then an opportunity to expand that even further, to put ourselves maybe a little bit out of our comfort zone, to take on a challenge, to learn and grow from that challenge, to show ourselves that we are capable of overcoming that challenge. because that really builds that sort of resilience muscle that then you can take into all the other aspects of your life as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I hear when you're saying that. I feel in my body that some people that self care or self love sometimes that can show up or be perceived as self love when really it's self sabotage, and there's a belief that it is self love, but the self love's based on conditions that, if they're not the perfect conditions for you, can sometimes then create more stress, fear, and overwhelm in the body. That, if you exercise, but I'll self love myself if I look a certain way and I'm a certain size, or self love for me is having a block of chocolate at night because that's how I'm going to feel good. And actually, if I keep doing that, I don't sleep well, and it's a struggle, but that's my version at the moment of self-love. So I think what you're saying is that introspection to go back and find what you really need and to have real acceptance of who you are firstly, then to be able to step into that position of self-love.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's kind of two bits to what you just said. One is absolutely, doing things, exercising because you love yourself, eating the food because you love yourself, not because you hate yourself, is super important to that. And the second thing that you sort of started to touch on there, I think, was that more longer term perspective as well. So once again, it's about doing the things that I know are going to make me feel good in the long term. So, the block of chocolate might make me feel great right now while I'm consuming it, but then I know in half hour time I'm going to feel tired and grumpy and guilty, and then in a month's time I'm going to feel like I'm not in the shape that I'd like to be and don't have the energy I'd like to be, and all of those other things that come as a result of that one small choice repeated over time. So it's important to have that longer term perspective as well, not just the which is once again very common in our society now, is that we're so focused on the short term and the quick fix and the instant results that we often lose the perspective to see, well, what happens if I keep repeating that action over time, and is that an act of love, or is that an act of, as you said, self-sabotage, and might I choose to do that differently next time, if I take that longer term perspective.
Yeah, mate. And I think that connects to the topic that we're going to discuss in a bit more depth today, Brett, which is around that resilience piece, and something that I know that you're really passionate about now and been working closely with people. And, you went through some really shifts and some monumental changes in your life that, really challenged you. And I'd love for you to, to touch on that and discuss a little bit about that and what the work you've been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, resilience is a topic I've been interested in for some time, but especially having gone through divorce and separation, which was sort of a monumental shift for me in that regard. And so, I, in many ways, had been living quite an idealistic life. I was practicing as a chiropractor, had a wife, had 2 kids, had my house in the hills that I just loved, my lifestyle, and felt like everything was going really well, until in a relatively short space of time, went through a divorce and separation, and felt like the rug had absolutely been pulled out from under me. And as someone who has spent years, decades researching health and wellness and resilience and all these other topics, I felt like I was in a pretty good place. I had a pretty good perspective. I had pretty good knowledge to help me work my way through that and to come out the other side, relatively well. The challenge was that in that point in time, I was definitely feeling like a failure as a result of, the fact that my family had fallen apart. I wasn't able to be there the whole time for my kids. I hadn't been obviously the husband that I'd ideally wanted to be. Certainly not consciously, but subconsciously, that I'd later realized there was stuff that I could have done better. And as a result of that, I was stressed, so my work wasn't going well. I was, dealing with career challenges. I was dealing with challenges of trying to, maintain custody of my kids, and or at least, get to a situation where we could have 50-50 custody of the kids. And so I thought, well, I've got to fix this. And, typical sort of male brain, I'm like, all right, I've got all these skills. I've just got to fix it. I'm just going to delve in. And the part I missed was what we mentioned before, was the self-love and the self-care and the being kind to yourself, So I sort of delved right in with all these tools that I had and started analyzing the bejesus out of everything I'd done and said, and where I'd gone wrong and what I'd done wrong and how I was going to fix it and try and change it all overnight. And really just beating myself up really badly for all these perceived things that I'd done wrong, and taking full responsibility, like every single thing that had gone wrong was my responsibility, and I had to do something about it. And that led me to a really dark place, because it led me to feel like an absolute failure, and that I just wasn't sure how to sort of dig my way back out of that. So this required a real change in perspective from me in order to be able to come out the other side. And this is where I've started to realize that, well, this self-love and self-care really had to be the first step. Like I just could not move forward until I got myself into a healthier place. And so that's where this sort of approach of looking at the foundation and the building blocks of resilience. And the long story short was that I was then able to transition my way out of that place and to get myself back into a point where I was feeling a lot better about myself, which then allowed me to expand out and ultimately end up with getting my career back on track, finding a new partner, getting married again. I've now got a third child with a really happy family that I just love. And so that journey from there really helped me understand just how important resilience was in terms of the ability to take that punch in the face and to realize that didn't have to be the end of the line, and that I didn't just have to try and survive it, but that I could actually thrive through it, to the point where now I look back on that time in my life and I'm really grateful for it. Like, I'm really genuinely grateful that it happened. And I can see all of the lessons that I learned from that. I've now been able to share my story with thousands and thousands of people and see the benefit they've gleaned from hearing that story and seeing and learning from the processes I went through to get myself back on track. And obviously, as you mentioned before, I'm now able to mentor people in this resilience space and see how, not only are these resilience tools and lessons that I've sort of been able to piece together and learned along the way, not only they've been able to help people with their relationships, but they've been able to help people in all other aspects of their life as well, whether that's their career challenges, their relationship challenges, their diet and exercise challenges, their chronic health challenges, whatever it is that they're going through, they're able to use that same sort of framework and those same lessons that I learned to help themselves as well. So that's been, I guess, the most pleasing aspect of the journey. It wasn't until I went to our Wellness Summit, which is our big event we do for our Wellness Couch podcast network, and shared my story on stage and sort of got the feedback from really overwhelming feedback from people about just how much they resonated with that story, and how beneficial sharing that story and sharing that process was with them. It wasn't until then that I realized just what I'd been through to start with, and that perhaps the way I dealt with it was maybe somewhat different to the way other people had dealt with it, and that there were some real lessons and information I could then share with people to really help them along their way as well. But once again, that's just been an absolute blessing for me to be able to go through that and to learn from that, and now to share that, particularly in this mentoring group, the Exercising Resilience mentoring group I'm doing, and just see other people and create a really tight-knit community there where people can support each other to develop their resilience and to get into that growth mindset to move forwards and to thrive through their challenges rather than getting pushed down by them.
Yeah, it's a great story, mate. I think for you to go through something, we talk about wellness a lot, but to actually experience something for yourself again, I think it's more powerful than any tool or any anything you can learn at uni is the personal experience.
And absolutely. And I think part of what that whole process made me realize was just how naive I'd been up until that point. Like I kind of look back at stuff that I was sharing and teaching people and helping people with prior to that point, and realize that I just didn't have anywhere near the level of understanding and empathy and kindness and I didn't get it in the way that you get it once you've gone through it. And it really is just a different perspective that stress and that challenge gives you to help understand where people are at and just how hard it can be to build yourself back up after that sort of challenge.
Mate, I'd love to just sit in that, when you got to self-love, like to get to there, like what was that like for you to get, even to be able to actually open yourself up to see that was the way forward? Like what were the steps before that? And I ask that because I'd love to know, how much of the work that you do with people can you provide the tools and provide the resources, but how much of it do people need to sit in it themselves and actually go through it on their own as well?
Yeah, so 100% is the answer. So, I can't help anyone. I can help provide an environment. I can help share some tools. But really, it's not about me. It's about them, so it's their personal journey. And really, I tend to think of it a bit like the butterfly coming out of the cocoon. It's like me helping them try and do it, or me trying to do it for them, ultimately is actually going to make it worse. What needs to happen is they need to discover that for themselves. And so it's not about fixing things for them. It's about creating an environment where they can discover that. And really, as I said, more than discover is rediscover that for themselves, is get back to that place, right? Because innately, we're very resilient beings. If you look at a kid learning to walk, I've got a 6-month-old at the moment. He's not quite learning to walk yet, but he's kind of learning to crawl at the moment. And, he doesn't fail and crack it and decide he's never going to do it again. He just keeps trying and keeps trying and keeps experimenting, keeps playing. He's very resilient in that respect. And I think to a large degree, that's our natural state. So, I think it's very much about creating an environment where that's possible. And it's also about having some help along the way, So for me, there were a couple of real fundamental things there that really helped me along the way. A dear friend of mine, Kim Morrison, who has a self-love podcast on the Wellness Couch, who's just a wonderful, wonderful person. And but she sat me down at one stage and kind of hit me between the eyes. When I was really, I guess, wallowing in my self-pity and beating myself up, she sat me down and sort of hit me between the eyes and told me it was time to kind of step up. And so I think I don't know, am I allowed to swear on your show?
Yeah, that's
all right.
fine.
So I think the actual word she told me was to man the fuck up.
Yep.
And so she just kind of reminded me that I was stronger than I was letting myself believe, and that I was more capable than I was letting myself believe, and that ultimately it was my responsibility to pick up where I'd left off and to get moving again. And so that was a crucial moment there of just hit right between the eyes, going, oh yeah, okay, that's right. If it's going to be, it's up to me. I better get started, and then moving on from there, though, I was very fortunate that I was surrounded by an amazing network, an amazing tribe of people, all of our podcasters on our Wellness Couch community. I've got so many friends and family who are really into health and wellness and personal development and mindset. And so, I was just surrounded by tools and people who were there to help me and to support me along the way. So, once again, whilst I fully recognize, and Kim so bluntly pointed it out, that they couldn't do it for me, that it was up to me, but having that support and that tribe around was a huge part of that. And once again, that's a big part of the reason why I've developed this exercising resilience mentoring community, is that I recognize that it's not just about the mentoring and the environment that I can create for people, but it's around helping them find that tribe and connecting and communicating with that tribe of like-minded people who are on that sort of growth mindset, resilience journey, that's going to help them out along the way as well.
It's a really good advice, mate. So I think even if you're not going through something like you're going through, sorry, not to the degree that you're going through it, but even if you're feeling a bit flat or you just don't know where to start, like that support community and trying to find like-minded people who can support you, but provide some accountability. And, it sounds like what Kim did, the right support in the right time frame at the right time is crucial for us. As humans.
Timing was everything on that one. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That we tend to only think about resilience when the bad times come. And I think that is symptomatic of the way we approach almost everything in our health in our modern society, is we kind of wait till the shit hits the fan and then decide we should do something about it. But the reality is resilience is really important in the good times too. And so, if you're striving to have some degree of academic success or financial success, or maybe socializing and dating success, or health and wellness, lifestyle design success, then resilience is going to be a really important part of all of those processes as well. Whilst they may not be acute crises, there's going to be challenges along the way, and how you meet and thrive through those challenges is going to be a huge determinant in how successful you are in each of those areas. So I think you're spot on. It's not just about waiting for the crisis. In fact, the more that we can do it in the good times and build up that resilience and build up that self-confidence and self-belief in our ability to meet and deal with and thrive through challenges, then the better the position we're going to be in when the big things come along, because they will come along. We all experience them.
Yeah, and my background, Brett, for the last 10 years has been really around researching and around mindfulness, but especially around, Buddhist informed mindfulness and the teaching of impermanence in Buddhism, when we talk about growth mindset, but the idea of firstly acceptance and then understanding that there's a law of impermanence, that everything's in a constant state of change.
Yeah.
When we can start to put our head around that and understand nothing will be as it is, and be okay with that, it actually makes us really resilient, because our ability to accept and let go of things, even little things in day to day, actually build that muscle, because a lot of the stuff that does shake us is an attachment to a way we thought things should be, or we wish them to be, or how we'd projected ourselves. And that's what causes the stress, or the problem is the holding on to my lifestyle, my house, my way I'd seen myself in the relationship. And when that becomes questioned or taken away from us, we start to struggle. And I think when we can do that in all aspects, it can be quite helpful for us to be more resilient.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we were talking about this in our mentoring just the other day about it being, focusing on the process, not the result. And we're kind of laughing about it because I'm a massive footy fan and I love my footy. And many of my mentoring group are females who have no interest in footy whatsoever. And so, we kind of have a laugh about it. As I was saying, this is an analogy they always talk about. You hear the footy coaches say it all the time is, trust in the process and the results will take care of themselves. Don't worry about the results, just focus on the process. But it's very, very true when we're talking about this sort of stuff, and I think, one of my favorite quotes, which is, this too shall pass, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, is like, if you can just remember that this too shall pass, that's that sort of impermanence that you're talking about. And that does allow you to focus on, on the growth, not necessarily the end result, and certainly not on the feedback about the end result, which is often the other thing that we're really stuck on is, what do people think of us? What are people saying about us? What's what feedback are we getting back from others about our results? Whereas if we can just acknowledge that, well, this is just a temporary thing and it's going to keep changing and growing and evolving. And so, in order for me to keep up, I need to keep changing and growing and evolving too. Then that allows us to stay in that sort of growth mindset of, learning and development and not to get too, hyperbolic when it gets high and not to get too flat when it goes low. You can actually create a bit more neutrality around that, because you understand that, yes, this is a high and the highs are really enjoyable. And part of the reason the highs are really enjoyable was because the lows were so hard, and vice versa. That yin and yang is actually a really important part of the whole process, and it's normal and it's natural, and contrary to what everyone else's Instagram feed shows, everyone else is going through it too. And that's totally okay. That whole shades of gray, rather than the black and white thinking, I think is really important in that respect.
Yeah. And then the outcome, I think that when you do those processes well, Brett, the outcome of that's a real state of equanimity where you can just sit with things just as they are and not as you'd wished or hoped them to be, which is something that I talk a lot to people about. And then because there's a full acceptance of that. And I think that sometimes that growth mindset, which I read Carol Dweck's book, almost 8 years ago now, I think it's a really good book. Some of that I think people misinterpret sometimes of a growth mindset needs that I need to do more to be more, and I need to get all this information in to keep growing, to keep expanding my mindset, where sometimes it's about you need to be more to do more, and again, what we said is have that self-care and that self-reflection to then grow, as opposed to expect it to come from somewhere else, which I think was something, we'd mentioned in our conversations, was that honesty with ourselves, and how do we be more honest with ourselves, and how do we show up and take ownership in those moments as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes down to, in terms of what you were saying before about the growth mindset and not getting stuck in the achievement side of things, it does come back to, focusing on the growth, not focusing on the results. And my way of thinking around that is that when you focus on the growth rather than the results, what it allows for me is to remain in a degree of curiosity,
Mm.
and sort of almost more in a degree of playfulness as well. Because when you're not so focused on the results, then you're not so worried about which direction you're going in. It actually frees you up. I often think about it in terms of like freedom of choice, because it's like I've gotten to the point where I've removed all of that other external gunk. And then that means that I'm actually free to make the choices that I want to make. I'm not worried about what other people are going to think. I'm not worried about whether it's going to be successful or not. I'm not worried about any of that stuff, because I know that I'm doing the right thing for me, and that I'm growing as a person, and that I'm, developing and resilient enough to deal with whatever comes my way as a result of that choice that I make. So playfulness and the curiosity is then what allows us to be open to possibilities, so we don't get stuck in the attachment to the result, but we're able to play and change direction and do what is right for us, for our own personal growth and for our own personal development. And I think that's ultimately where we want to be, is in that playful state, in that curious state, where we're not fixated on results and achievements and outcomes, but actually the growth mindset is not a growth mindset for the purpose of achievement, but the growth mindset is actually the purpose in and of itself, is just the growth and development and curiosity is actually the purpose. Playing full out and living your life purpose is what it's really all about. So, as I said, I think that kind of answers the bit that you said before you asked at the end, but I can't actually remember what the question you asked at the end was that I was supposed to answer.
We'll get to that one, but I think I love what you're saying there, because I think part of how we can get that growth mindset and what you're getting at is that ability when we stay in the moment and we're present and we haven't sort of got a projection or a preconceived view of how it should be. And it's almost, when you're saying that, I'm envisaging sometimes when you go and watch a band or a speaker and you're expecting big things from the head speaker or the band, but you actually get the best experience from the person before the main person comes on. And that the opportunity to grow and expand is everywhere. It's not just at certain books or certain podcasts. It can be in all parts of life. It could be with your 4-year-old child, if we've got the openness to accept what they're giving us.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. And I think many of the best lessons I've learned in life have been from my kids. Like, they're just the most amazing teachers. And yeah, I think, one of the things I love to do with people, if they are setting goals and doing some, goal setting, is to add on to the end of that, the addition of, or something better. And even just that simple tweak could be such a mind shift to go, well, yeah, this is what I'm goaling for right now, or something better, right? Because I don't have to fix myself into the rigidity of that goal and the rigidity of that one result that I think that I need, when the reality is that result might not be what I need, and it might not be where I'm really shooting for, and it might not be in alignment with my higher purpose, and my higher purpose might even change along the way. So it's like just the ability to be open to possibilities and flexible. And once again, I think that is something that we have when we're really resilient, is the ability to adapt and to flex, and to not break when things all of a sudden come at us and things change, but just to sort of modify along the way, and to take life as it comes, and to be okay with the idea that, like I said, our bigger why and our purpose and our goals and our desires are going to change along the way, and that's totally okay.
Yeah, and you've mentioned it a few times, and I'm a huge purpose and values guy when I work with people. And could we discuss that for 10 or so minutes before we finish? But just the importance of having purpose and sort of connecting to your why regularly and having that established almost as, I don't know if you think the same, almost as your foundation or your starting point or your compass to then move from, that you can come back to if you become a bit lost.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of it as the core underlying philosophy behind everything you do. So, like, literally, that is the foundation of every single decision I make every single day, right? Because, and whether that's conscious or not, right? So you're either doing it consciously, where you're aware of your why and your purpose, and therefore the decisions you're naturally going to align with that, or many people are doing it subconsciously, where they're allowing other people to dictate to them, or society to dictate them to their why and their purpose, and that is subconsciously controlling every single decision they make along the way. So it is really that crucial. Like, it's that fundamental. It's about you deciding to take ownership of your life. And really, if you don't know where you want to end up, or once again, it doesn't need to be exactly where you want to end up. It needs to be how you want to be, as you said earlier, is probably a better example of that, because it's how you be rather than where you end up that's the really important thing in terms of this sort of growth mindset and resilience. So having that understanding of how you want to be is what allows you to shape all of these decisions, and it makes every decision you make easier. To make the decision, right? Because when you're really clear on what your higher purpose is, the decisions almost become self-evident. So if you're really struggling with decisions in your life, have a look at your self-purpose, because if you know what your self-purpose is, that's your guiding light for making your decisions. And secondly, to be able to stick at it, to have the resilience to see it through. Because I think one thing we haven't necessarily spoken about a lot yet is that resilience, it takes time, that working through these challenges, it's not like, well, I've got resilience, so I just click my fingers and it's done. It's a process and it takes time, and you've got to work your way through it. But when you're constantly connected and reconnected to your why and to your higher purpose, then you have that inbuilt inspiration and differentiating inspiration from motivation. So, many people will get motivated potentially by this podcast to want to go out and change something and do something, and that's great. But if that's not connected with your higher purpose, then you're not going to have the inspiration, which is what helps keep it going. Inspiration, that connection to your higher purpose, is a driver that can keep going. It's like a perpetual motion machine. It's like every single day, it just keeps pushing you to keep pursuing your higher purpose. Whereas motivation, as we said earlier, with the shorter term challenges, it's easier to lose. It's easier to, as you said, lose 5 kilos in 5 weeks and then regain 6 kilos in 5 weeks. That's motivation. Inspiration is different. If you can connect that person with a higher why, a great example of this was actually my now wife, who I'd been friends with for a number of years before we became partners. And she actually came to one of our events. She was a photographer at one of our events. And I'd been talking about exercise and connecting your why to your exercise. And she'd been photographing the event. So she came up to me afterwards. She said, look, I really like what you heard, but I kind of missed some of it because I was taking the photos and downloading them and doing whatever. Can we talk about it? We ended up having this bit of a mentoring session. And she realized that her why, as we sort of discussed it backwards and forwards, her why that we came up with for her exercise was she created this vision of climbing up to the top of a volcano at sunrise with all of her camera gear and taking the perfect photo of this sunrise. And that was her thing. So that then over the next 6 months was what motivated her to exercise, was because it was going to help her do what she loved doing in life and what she saw as her higher purpose, which was just capturing the beauty of the world. So long story short, 6 months later, she gets called up by a yoga retreat in Bali, says, we want you to come. We're going to pay you, fly over here, take all our photos for our event. And by the way, on one of the mornings, we're going to get up really early in the morning. We're going to hike up a volcano and see the sunset. And so that was just like the most, spine-tingling example of how having that higher purpose can get you your motivation, your inspiration, to keep driving you in doing what you want to do. And then, you never know where that's going to end up in terms of the end result of that. Sometimes can be more spooky and more amazing than you ever imagined.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story. And it sort of shows sometimes also how the, how things just come together when you actually do have a plan, and how much does just come into your sphere and into your psyche and into your, into your energy fields when you've got that higher purpose, and when you're living from your values and from that purpose. I almost think that your outcome then becomes, I think, Brett, a lot clearer, because you know what you're living from, and then you know where to get to, as opposed to starting to where I want to get to. It's how do I want to get there, and how do I want to live from there. And then for me, anyway, that outcome or output becomes really clear for me of where I want to go right now, because I've got a foundation to start from always.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think some people see that as, like the universe conspiring to help them, and take a very sort of spiritual view of that. And that's great. And that really works for some people. And then other people are much more pragmatic, and they really struggle with some of those concepts. But really, once they can start to understand it as essentially like a confirmation bias. Like it's like, if you've just bought the most amazing red car, then everywhere you drive, you're going to see these amazing red cars. If you've decided that your life goal is to hike to the top of a volcano and take some photos, then there's no way you're going to miss that opportunity when it
No.
comes along. You are going to see that opportunity and you're going to take advantage of it and you're going to say yes when it comes along. And that's, I think, an important perspective for some people to understand who, as I said, some people struggle with the more spiritual aspects of that, but they can understand the pragmatic aspects of that as well. And so it's important for, both sets of people to understand that, I reckon.
Yeah, that's really important. And then it sort of comes back to what we've discussed as the theme of the conversation is around that growth mindset or that openness to really allow it to come in regardless, and not to be shut off to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be curious, I think I find curiosity and flexibility are two of the most important skills you can have, especially as you start to get older. That is where I think a lot of people lose their curiosity and lose their flexibility, both of body and mind. And I think that can really start to limit your options and limit your ability to keep growing and developing. So, I definitely think having that perspective and having that connection and that why, combined with that growth mindset, allows you to keep looking for those opportunities to stay curious about the different paths that you can potentially take and not allow yourself just to get stuck in that track and stuck in that rut.
Would you even say, Brett, like probably other ways, but even as a starting point to adopt a more growth mindset is curiosity is probably one of the first things you could do is just to get more curious in conversations about your work, about how to get better with your diet, but just to adopt even that attitude of curiosity to more moments is going to open you up naturally. And it's going to actually naturally always bring you into the present moment as a really easy starting point to get on track.
Well, I think it is, but I still come back to the thing that I think the self-love and the self-care has to be the first stepping point. And the reason I say that is that the challenge can be if you are, very curious, you might start finding a whole bunch of information that doesn't support you either. And so sometimes you can get curious about what am I doing wrong? Why am I failing? What is why is life unfair? Why is my boss doing this to me? Why is the world? Why is society making it hard for? You know what I mean? So you can be really curious about in a very fixed mindset, and you can be really curious in a really growth mindset. And so I think the key is that when you come from that position of self-love and self-care, you've built yourself up from the inside. Then you've got the strength to go out and be curious about the world and to take on board all of that information in a much healthier way, and to sort of not take on board the negative stuff, but to choose to take on board the more, well, not necessarily negative and positive, because you're always going to take on board negatives and positives, but to choose to take on board that more growth-oriented information that's going to help you grow and evolve, as opposed to information that's going to cause you to get more and more stuck. So once again, you got to be curious. You got to be careful with information in our modern society because we have an oversupply of information, and so sometimes if you're just being curious without necessarily having that grounding before it, then that can lead you down the wrong path as well, I reckon.
Yeah, I guess I was chunking it back even to if you want to talk about self-love and self-care as a starting point, but how do you get curious about that?
Yeah.
Of where am I right now? So again, that curiosity almost becomes the starting point to explore self-love and self-care of where have I been?
Yeah, absolutely. We get quite psyched with them, can't we? But yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah,
you do have to have that element of an open mind to be able to even just learn and grow those new strategies. And the great thing about this is that just purely by virtue of the fact that they're listening to your podcast, they've already got at least that element of curiosity to get them started, which is great.
Yeah. And I do love curiosity because I think even in, you mentioned one analogy to go out there and then I went back the other way. But a lot of people understand the concept of curiosity. It's an easy sell on to people to go, actually, I know how to do that. So that's the bit that I do like about it is most people get it as opposed to some other tools or techniques. Yeah,
absolutely. And as you said, it is fundamental to have, at least some element of an open mind. And I think this is, it's important for people to remember as well before they go trying to sort of push on to other people as well, that when you do start making these changes and you see results in your own life and you feel like you're becoming more resilient, then your natural first step is to want to sort of push that onto everyone else around you that you love and you care about as well. But you do need to wait for that spark of curiosity from them as well. You can't just jam stuff down people's throats. That level of curiosity from them is really important for them to be ready and them wanting to see how what you've learned might be useful to them and help them achieve their own personal purpose as well. So I think it is a good reminder to look for that element of curiosity before we start sharing.
We see that both a lot in both the vegan and the paleo communities. Is that sort of once they get a hold of it,
starts, right?
Yeah, you got to tell everyone about it. No one else knows, so I'm going to tell everyone. Mate, before we finish, what would be, 3 to 5 tips that you'd have or quick tools that people could start to adopt, especially, in the uncertain time? Like, what would you have for someone as a takeaway from this conversation?
Yeah, so I think, once again, I think that the first thing to do is really that focus on self-love. And there's lots of resources and tools out there you can use to help you. My beautiful friend Kim Morrison, who I mentioned earlier, has written a wonderful book called The Art of Self-Love, which would be a great spot to start. But just recognizing that is something that you can work on and grow is that self-love. So just getting really present with yourself and caring for yourself, I think, is really important. I think taking action in terms of that self-care. So start really small, like start super easy, so small that you couldn't possibly fail, right? Pick the one thing you'd most like to do that you think is going to be the most fun and start there. Because I think the key with that is to really set yourself up for success. So set yourself up so that you couldn't possibly fail, so that when you succeed, you feel good and you create a real snowball effect from that. And then, as I said before, I think connecting with your tribe, find your mentor, find your tribe, find your support group that's going to help you along the way, and there's going to be the role model for you, and that you can role model to them and help build yourself up in that way as well, because I think you can grow just as much from both sides of that coin. I think those are, I could list easily a dozen different things here, but I think those are some great starting points. And obviously, if people want to find a tribe, then our mentoring group is certainly somewhere they could come and find that. No doubt your podcast listeners are also another great tribe in that regard of, just surrounding yourself with people like Luke, is a great way to bring people into your life that are going to help build you up rather than push you down.
Yeah, beautiful, mate. Yeah, there's a practice that I do, and I've been doing a while now, but it's super powerful, and it's quite confronting when you start, but it's to look in the mirror for just a minute and just repeat the words, "I love you."
Yeah.
And just to do that, I do that in the morning when there's no one around. But again, that ability of talk about self-love, to look at yourself and say those words.
Yeah. And it's super uncomfortable when you first start, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And but then you start to accept the words and it starts to come into your being a bit more.
Yeah.
So again, that's just something simple. And have you got another book coming out, Brett?
I do. So my book, Rock Bottom, is going to be coming out in December. So it's just with the printers right now, which is very exciting. And
beautiful.
And in fact, the pre-orders will be available by the time this goes to air. So people can go and get that. But it's called Rock Bottom, and it's all about that journey I've just described, for sort of divorce and separation, and financial and business stress, and how I sort of survived and thrived through that, and the lessons I learned and the tools I picked up along the way. So that will be out in December, which is super exciting.
We might be able to get you back on, mate, to give that a bit of a discussion later on.
I'll definitely get in touch. Yeah.
Mate, thanks for that. I really appreciate it. I'll put some links to the show notes for where you're at and some of the work that you do and some of the podcasts that you've been involved in. But, really great to talk wellness, and I appreciate it, mate. And
the other link I wanted to share with you guys, Luke, is I created a link just for you, for your listeners, so that if they do want to have a month of free wellness mentoring, they can join us in our Exercising Resilience group for free for a month, and decide whether that's something they might like to continue with beyond that as well. So if they go to drbretthill.com/conscious, and I'll send you that link so you can put it up there somewhere for people, they can actually join us in that resilience mentoring for 30 days. They get 2 mentoring sessions, they get a 21-day challenge, and they get can be coached by me, mentored by me personally every single day within our private group, where I go in there every single day to sort of answer questions and celebrate wins and help people along their journey as well. So They can do that for free for 30 days. There's no obligation to continue beyond that if they don't wish to. But yeah, I put that together just for your listeners as well, Luke, so they can enjoy that and help get themselves a real kickstart on that resilience journey.
Beautiful, mate. I really appreciate that. So, yeah, I'll definitely put that in the show notes. But again, mate, thanks for the conversation. It's been awesome.
It's been a great chat, mate. Thanks for having me on.